Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains, episode number 897. This is for the 27th of March. This is the pre-show, the magical time of the program where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time we say really outrageous things. So it's been a wild weekend of weather down here across the deep south. And obviously we'll talk a lot about that, but let me get some logistical chores done here. Embed code has got to go in so we can get on television. All right, and we're good to go. And I think everybody's been invited, so hopefully at this point, we will see our regulars showing up here in a second. We got 4 minutes to showtime. If you're looking for the show content, just move the slider over about 4 minutes. Actually had to switch computers. I'd run these computers. I mean, I drive these things like a borrowed mule. I mean, I ride them hard. And the screen, the LCD display, started to die on the old one, and I knew it was coming. You could see it coming, and instead of repairing the screen, I moved that computer into service, replacing an old Mac Mini that's like 10 years old. And so this is a newer computer, and the way I do it, whenever I get a new computer, I like to start from scratch, nuke and pave. Don't transfer things over. It's starting from scratch, because if you bring it over, with Time Machine or your backups, all this cruft and junk comes on there. And I like to start clean, but it is a pain in the boohunkus because you have to configure a lot of this stuff. And hopefully we're configured properly for the show tonight, because it is a little confusing how we do this. Not really confusing, but it's a little complex. I use a virtual audio patch program called Audio Hijack, which enables our guests to hear the little audio segments I play, and we record it using that. And so that's got to work. And then a lot of things have to work. Wirecast has to work, but it's working. Jen, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
If it's just me and you, then we got plenty to talk about.
Absolutely. We're broadcasters. We're always talking.
Oh, here comes James A. And with the three of us, it's just what we do. We talk for a living.
That's right.
All right. So, I had to replace the computer this weekend, which was the worst conceivable weekend to do that. I mean, out of all weekends, it's like three sleepless nights.
Yes, I saw your watch. It was giving you some suggestions on how much to get. You're like, no, that's not happening.
Hello, your sleep pattern is a little erratic. Oh, brother.
That watch ain't no dummy. It knows.
Yeah.
It knows.
Yeah. All right. So y'all talk a minute. Let me get my audio level set here. I need some testing.
Okay. James A., how are you?
I'm doing well. They're being noisy in the studio a little bit behind me, but they'll be cleared out here pretty soon.
That's all right. How's it getting back to the old grind? You're clean.
I know. I had to break out the lawnmower and take off that beard. But no, it's good. And starting to see the weather pattern starting to shift a little bit more toward spring unsettledness over the next couple of weeks. So not really looking forward to that.
Me either.
All right, so here comes Rick, and Bill is out again. Do I need to invite the guest? I have been busy.
Yeah, and, I think Kim's in charge tonight. She's leading the show. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if that's the case, we're good. Here she comes. Here she comes. So all is well. Okay. Yeah, it's just like during these multiple day events, I didn't sleep really much Friday night, Saturday night, or last night. It look, it just happens. This is nothing new. It's just it happens, and it happens. So it's all good. All right, there's Kim. Are you going to invite our guests? Do I need to do anything? Okay. And what is this apps in the Zoom window I'm seeing? By the way, welcome to our television viewers. Glad you're here. We're about to start the show in a second. I've got this long row of apps in the Zoom window. I've never seen this before. Oh. AI Note Taker by Fathom. Never take meeting notes on a Zoom call again.
It's easier just not to go to meetings.
Yeah, that's it.
I don't know. I've never seen that.
Kahoot, energize meetings, training, and presentations through interactive and game-based elements. Brother. And I'm not gonna do any of these, I promise. Let's see.
Might be really interesting.
Yeah. There's a bunch of AI stuff. Here's another one. Meeting recaps, transcripts, recording from read, instant meeting recaps using AI. It's all about AI.
It has achieved singularity in Birmingham, Alabama first.
Yeah. What's the Google? Who's on the Google beta? Their AI thing, the Bard. Has anybody tried that? Usually I sign up for this stuff early, but the early adopter thing is fizzling. When I was a young, energetic guy like everybody else on the show here, I would do things like that. The only thing I'll go over to Chat GPT every once in a while and say, who's James Spann, and just to see what they say about me.
Does it change?
It does. It's literally a different answer every time you ask, which is strange, and it's fairly accurate. So who knows? I should ask them. We should go to Chat GPT and ask who's WeatherBrains. Who are these people? Why are they there?
Why are they there?
Maybe we ought not do that. Okay.
Yeah. That might be a really bad idea.
Just a little tidbit there. Okay.
All right. Let's see.
From the thing that's going to destroy academia, by the way.
Dr. Hauser, I think, is on the line here.
I am, yes. I'm not sure what's going on with my video. I don't seem to have it.
No, we don't. You sound really good, but we cannot see you. But about 3 out of 4 listen to this. So if you don't have a camera, it's not the end of the world.
I do. My camera's on, and it shows that it should be on. I'm just not sure why it's not. I'm having every kind of technical glitch I think that's possible tonight. So let me unplug and try to plug in again.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what we're going to do, we're going to get started and give you'll have 5 minutes you got plenty of time. 5 minutes. You got this. So let's turn on these recorders. And I hope that we are recording. Yeah, it sure looks like we are. And the soundboard looks good. So let's try this. Here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Join the American Meteorological Society by becoming a member of the band. The AMS Weather Band is a global community of weather enthusiasts dedicated to learning and sharing their love of science. Visit amsweatherband.org to learn more and join the band today.
WeatherBrains episode number 897 for the 27th of March, 2023. Weather is always interesting this time of the year, and we've had some over the past 3 days down here where we are. But good to see the gang is all here, except for a few absences. We have Bill Murray, who is on a 2-week pub crawl, apparently. So Bill hopefully will be back next week. And we've got Dr. Jacobs is out tonight, but I think the rest of the gang is here. Rick Smith out in Norman, Oklahoma. How you doing?
Doing good. Nice weather today. We've ups and downs with the springtime weather, with front later this week, and then fire weather and severe weather, and it's March.
Yeah, we'll do a weather roundup. So people have been griping we stopped doing that, and we will do a full weather roundup because this is obviously a very interesting time of the year, and that there looks like a fairly high impact event potentially later this week. Let's go down to Texas. Troy Kimmel is in Austin. Troy, how you doing?
Really nice day today. We got the mid and upper 70s today, and we've stayed just north of a warm front, which we suspected would come a little further north than it has, and it hasn't. So just kind of watching that as we go through the evening. I've got a big event going on at UT tonight that I'm having to watch, but don't see anything out there for the time being. So I like the weather today, given that it'll be 137 in 4 months. So,
And I do know a lot of people are watching tonight, wanting us to comment on what's happened over the past 3 days. The tornadoes in Mississippi and Alabama and all of the things that have happened. And we will do that. So just sit back, relax, and we're going to get there. Let's go up to Jen in the lovely Buckeye state of Ohio. Jen, I saw your cat walk through your shot. How's your cat doing?
She's fine. She did get not the greatest doctor's appointment last week. We got some tests done, and she's been dealing with chronic kidney disease for 8 years, and I babied her along here, but she's still kicking, and she just wants to be the star of the show. She's right here. I kicked her off, and she's like, "No, I'm here."
Cat.
Yeah,
I like
she
it.
is 16 years old. I know she looks like a kitten.
Wow.
But she's 16. But no, we're good. Soggy start to our day, but then we got a little bit of sun, and it wasn't too bad. I'm still cold though, so I'm ready for a little bit more warmth to stick around a little bit longer. But we know what warmth means. It means more storms. So, you got to just take it as it comes. But we're good up here.
Let's go. Good. Let's go to the king of the puns, Dr. James Adelot from Tulsa, Oklahoma. This man could write for any comedian in the world, and he would nail it. This man is, I know, funny, and this guy's funny.
Once. I can write for him once. And then, we might want to find something else to do. Tulsa's pretty quiet today. We hit 60. It was 31 this morning, but I can assure you it has not killed or gotten rid of any of the pollen. I am pre-pollen focused, and first Troy sends up cedar pollen from Austin, and then we get our own stinking trees that pollinate too.
And I talked to James like Sunday night on the phone, and we're sitting there talking. The first thing he does just hops all over me. Meanwhile, I've got this pollen covering everything out here in the backyard, and so I shut off the flow to Tulsa officially now. So I'm just letting y'all know that.
Just in time for our trees to all bloom. But we're kind of like Rick. We're going to be watching what happens Thursday night and Friday morning, and then deal with fire weather. So we've got a county that butts up to Tulsa County, Osage County, and it's in all 4 stages of drought, from level 4 in the northwest corner to just abnormally dry in the southeast corner. So it's been a pretty sharp cutoff for us. It's that I-44 thing I'm sure Rick hears about all the time.
Yep.
Osage County is the size of a state, though.
True. I don't know where this stuff used to happen before they built the interstate, but.
And again, I promise we are going to talk about the Mississippi tornadoes and what's to come, but let's bring in Dr. Kim, who is going to introduce our guest, and let's get this show on the road. Let's go.
Sure thing. Thanks, James. Well, it is great to have Dr. Jana Hauser with us tonight on WeatherBrains, and I just love to welcome you to the show. For those who are listening, I think you'll appreciate knowing that her background is a lovely setting of mimosas clouds in a sunset. Jana Hauser, welcome to WeatherBrains.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm just thrilled to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. And tonight, the conversation is going to be about tornadoes. Tornadoes are really your bread and butter area of study, and it's been something, too, that's been in the news. So I'm sure that we'll go back and forth on different topics, both the things that you're working on and some of the pressing concerns of the day as we go through this interview. But as we get into it, I'd really love for the audience to just get to know you a little bit better. You are at Ohio State, where you are a professor. As you get a little fuzzy, I feel like I'm taking an eye exam watching. But I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about your role in the department. What are you up to there, and what's your general area of research focus?
Yeah, absolutely. So I predominantly use mobile radar data to look at supercells and tornadoes. Really, that's kind of the skinny of it, so to speak. But I emphasize my analysis on looking at the formation of tornadoes, and particularly looking at the rotation as it is developing into a tornado and the several minutes that lead up to tornadogenesis time. And then I have a secondary area of expertise where I'm investigating the role that terrain and variations in land cover play in tornado modification. So really looking at if a tornado is going to weaken or intensify as it moves uphill or downhill, as it crosses a land cover barrier, such as, going from a river to a forest, or moving into a suburban area from a prairie or something along those lines.
So just tornado genesis and, land surface interactions, only some of the most interesting and sometimes heavily debated questions about tornadoes in our field. So we're really excited to get into both of those topics. I'm really curious, how does it feel to be at the Ohio State University? From your background, having come through Penn State earlier in life, do you feel like you're in enemy territory? How does that sit with you?
Yeah. So my trajectory is a little bit funny. I mean, I grew up in Eastern Pennsylvania, north of Philadelphia. So Penn State was a logical choice for undergrad. It was literally the only place that I actually applied. I applied for early admission, I got in, and that was that. So 4 years at Penn State, and then I went to Norman, where I did my master's degree and my PhD at the University of Oklahoma. So I worked with Dr. Howie Bluestein. He's pretty well known in the field of severe weather. So I worked for him for roughly 8 years. It was seemingly like a long time, but now that I'm on the other side of that, it was a wonderful time. And then I went from Oklahoma to Southeastern Ohio to Ohio University, which is a slightly smaller school. It's nestled kind of in the western foothills of the Appalachians. It's beautiful, very kind of hilly. And then just recently made the transition to OSU, not Oklahoma State, but Ohio State. Oklahoma and Ohio, being O states, all have the same acronyms, OU, OSU, can be very confusing. And in fact, when I was interviewing, lots of confusion, and there have been multiple interviews actually between Oklahoma and Ohio, and what OU are you talking about? Well, what OU are you talking about? So now I've been at Ohio State since August, and yes, I did initially feel kind of like I was in enemy territory. I'm kind of, settling in a little bit. I think the biggest cause for concern was from my Penn State roommates and colleagues who were like, "You're going where?" So there was a little bit of animosity, I think, and good, lighthearted animosity. But yeah, so now I'm at OSU and I'm absolutely loving it. I teach mesoscale meteorology and synoptic meteorology. And then the intro to synoptic, which is kind of like a combination observations forecasting. And then I'm hopefully going to get a new course on the books that is a radar course as well as a storm chasing class.
That's amazing. And I do want to pass the mic over to James A. for just a second. James, you had a comment about time and Howie, and I just think that everyone needs to hear it.
I just was in our chat, made the observation that one semester in Howie's synoptic lecture class seemed like 8 years for me. So I wasn't the best student undergrad.
Jenna, we won't share this with Howie, but you can tell us, do you follow his lecture style, which I have to describe as a little eclectic, or do you have your own for teaching synoptic?
No, I have very, very much strayed to the other side of the pendulum there. No, I pride myself on making my lectures as interactive and as fun as I can possibly do that. I have a team-based learning approach to my pedagogy, so basically require students to come to class before I ever even lecture, and have at least gone through the PowerPoints and have read through the PowerPoints. The very first thing we do, first thing in the week, is take a quiz. So that tests their readiness, really. But the good thing is they actually get to take it twice. They take it once as an individual, and then they take it once as a group. And then within their group settings, they can actually use their notes. So it's kind of a way to get them really involved. They do take the individual quiz first. So if they really haven't prepared, I will know that they really haven't prepared. But the group quiz is actually considerably weighted more heavily. And then I also do a lot of active learning activities, and we work on homeworks in class, and we have a lot more of a discussion-based lecture-ish kind of a thing than sitting in a chair listening to puns and jokes that were written in 1987.
James is
What's wrong with puns?
Nothing is wrong with puns.
No.
Yeah, there's the puns, and there's just there's a different, you've articulated just a very different means of conveying information there. So I do want to say, for people who are listening, we do have people who listen who are interested in pursuing careers in meteorology. This right here is a woman who she does amazing research, which we're about to get into, but also very much cares about teaching. Those faculty do exist in our field. So thank you, Jenna, for sharing all that. That is wonderful background. And I also want to say, chasing with Jenna would be a delight. I had the chance to chase with you once. It was with, I think, Gabe Garfield and
Jeff Snyder.
Yes, and Jeff Snyder. And it was the March 28th, 2007 Texas Panhandle outbreak.
Yeah.
And I remember as we drove, Jana was taking these extremely detailed notes of everything that was going on, because you were going to later do like a post-event analysis where you look more deeply at the remotely sensed data and then match it up with your observations. And I asked for a copy of those notes afterwards, thinking, oh my gosh, I mean, just chasing with these three people was an incredible experience. Some of the finest chasing minds you'll ever be around, and to have them together was unbelievable. But when I went back over your notes, Jana, I couldn't believe how incredibly brilliant they were for just driving along down the highway, and the kinds of things you were observing were things I wouldn't have picked up on. So if you have the chance, students, if she can get this course off the ground and you can be a part of this, don't miss the opportunity. You will learn so much. That's incredible. All right, so without further ado, let's talk a little bit more about your research. One of the things that you mentioned is that you use a lot of radar data. So you're chasing with radars. Can you tell us a little bit about what radar you're chasing with, and just what are the instruments you're using to collect your data?
Sure. So being a student of Howie's, I'm very strongly tied to Howie's instruments, and I still get data from Howie. So I haven't chased with a mobile radar post-graduate school because they're expensive. NSF doesn't really want to fund them anymore. So just getting one of these, although it's funny to say, I'm actually in the process right now of writing an internal university-based grant for a radar. So fingers crossed that the university values a mobile radar and we might be able to actually get one of these that's housed at Ohio State. So that's kind of the pipe dream, which would be fantastic. But basically a mobile radar is a radar dish that's usually on the order of like 10 feet or so in diameter that's mounted to a flatbed truck. It has a generator on the back that powers the whole thing. And it also is coupled to an internal processor that is able to essentially control the antenna from inside the truck, and also provides a graphical display so that we know what we're looking at. So historically, the work that I have really done over the last decade has used a mobile radar called the RAXPOL, which is an acronym for Rapid Scan X-band Polarimetric Radar. So that's a little bit of a mouthful, but breaking it down, it's a smaller scale radar. So the wavelength is 3 centimeters compared to the NexRad operational network, which has considerably larger antenna, and that wavelength is on the order of about 10 centimeters or so. So we mount one of these to a truck. The RAXPOL is unique because it scans incredibly quickly. Most radars will scan a 360-degree portion of the atmosphere in roughly 1-ish minute or so, perhaps a little less, maybe on the order of about 40 seconds. We can scan that in 2 seconds with RAXPOL. If you look at the full volumetric coverage of like a traditional NexRad, where it's going to take about 5 minutes to complete a full 3D volume scan, we can do that in under 30 seconds. So it's really critical to be using an instrument that has this really rapid temporal updates in order to study phenomena that are so rapidly changing.
Dr. Hauser, it seems to me back in the day, and I think this was probably mid-90s when Howie was out chasing with one of the first portable Doppler units, that was a continuous wave radar. What's the difference for data analysis in that?
Yeah, you're gonna test my limits of CW radar to their max here. I am going to, first of all, say I am not a CW expert, and basically
there's a reason why nobody else is doing this.
Yeah, so I mean, for one, they're very low power. So that's what makes them, CWs are basically small. Like you can move them around and carry them with like 2 to 3 people. So they're small, they're low power. They're relatively inexpensive as well, which is kind of nice. so a CW radar, if you look closely, actually has two antennas. It has a transmit antenna, and then it has a receive antenna on the other side. Sorry, I don't know why I keep going out there. That's weird. For those of you who weren't visually able to see that, my face basically just disappeared into my background. So anyway, the CW radar has two antennas adjacent to each other on the same platform, basically. And one is a continuous wave transmission, which is why they're called CW or continuous wave radars. And then the other is the receive. So my understanding is that it is a little bit harder to get things that are, for one, it's a lower power instrument, so you're not going to be able to see things as far away as you are with the transmit then receive option. And other than that, I can't tell you a whole heck of a lot about CW because I really am not overly familiar with the technology. I wish I were. In fact, Jeff Snyder, who we were just talking about a few minutes ago, is actually in the process of developing like a network of these things. And I kind of wish I could be like, phone a friend, call Jeff.
Well, I remember every time we were out, it was the Allison tornado in June of '95 in the Texas Panhandle. And I remember every time a car would drive by in front of that, whoever was operating it would jerk their headphones off. So there must have been some sort of audio that was really loud of a reflection when a car drove by, but we all thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. That is interesting. We'll do round two and I'll explain to you all the differences of CW versus traditional radars.
Right. If only we could do the phone a friend. We should do that. We should make this like, I mean, we sometimes we have gotten the feedback that being part of this show with the questions put forward by the panelists is a little bit like a defense exercise. So if we're going to put people through that, we should at least let them have all of the lifelines. We'll talk about that for future shows. But Jana, that was really expertly handled for not knowing anything about it. You taught us a lot about it. So, I mean, this is great for us understanding what it is you're going to study. All these instruments really determine what it is you can see. And that's part of what makes it so difficult to really study the kinds of things that you are studying. So one of the things that you are examining, as you highlighted for us earlier, is terrain influences. And so we just love to hear a little bit about this area of research. I think it's something that's gotten a lot of attention. There's not widespread understanding about the state of the science. What is really known about this? And, what were you hoping to add with the work that you pursued?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that there is more understood about the interaction between tornadoes and terrain than there is between tornadoes and variations in land cover and friction. Really, ultimately, land cover, what it does is it changes the properties of friction and turbulence and the cascade of turbulent energy and how that is interacting with the tornado vortex literally at the ground, which is going to change the dynamical properties of the tornado, like how the flow is coming in versus up, and what we call the corner flow dynamics, which is changing how things are swirling around versus converging, etc. So all of those things being very small scale are a lot harder to, one, observe, and two, simulate. So friction in the numerical world is a nightmare. So it's really, really challenging to handle that, which is part of the reason why we still don't have a particularly good answer about how friction and surface roughness variations change, which is one of the reasons that we want to be investigating observations, because then observations tell us really literally a ground truth of what's happening. So what I've been doing is using this mobile radar data to systematically investigate basically any kind of case that we can have or that we do have in our archives where we have tornadoes interacting with some kind of terrain feature. And now most of these you have to consider are central plains tornadoes. So we're not talking about, mountains. We're talking about river valleys that go down 20, 30 meters. We're talking about little hills that might rise 30 to 50 meters. I think the greatest variation that we have in any one of these individual cases is on the order of like 100 meters. So, and it's a little bit of more of a gradual terrain change rather than like a big slope. So with that in mind, what we have found in terms of terrain is that there almost in very many cases, there appears to be a correlation between variations in tornado intensity. And this is, by the way, measured not using like the F scale or anything. This is using the radar observations. So we're looking at the difference between the maximum inbound and outbound velocities in a radial velocity display. So we are finding that in many cases, and probably 75% of the cases that we've looked at, there is a correlation that's at least kind of on the order, if you're thinking in terms of statistics, on the order of like, you know, a 10 to 20% statistically significant what's the word I'm looking for? I can't even think of it. Independence between basically, or dependence rather, between the terrain and the tornado intensity. The problem is that in some cases, the tornado pretty clearly increases in intensity going uphill, while in other cases, it pretty clearly decreases in intensity going uphill. So there's a variety of questions that are posed there. One is, you know, are we actually seeing something, or is this maybe just kind of serendipitous? And in some cases, perhaps it is, but there are some pretty clear cases that show if the terrain is going up, the intensity is going down, for example, you know, almost, and statistically it's correlated that way as well. But we're not taking into consideration there in the real environment. This is the challenge with using observations, is that in the real world, there are so many parameters that we just can't even account for or control. So things, you know, we could break that down into, all right, we're not going to just look at terrain. We're also going to look at the slope. So how quickly does the land rise? What is the approach angle of the storm with respect to, you know, a linear axis on your terrain feature? Is it a hill that's more round, or is it a hill that's longer? You know, there's all kinds of other external factors that are not necessarily accounted for. So that makes it, I think, you know, the devil is in the details, so to speak. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here. Now, numerical simulations have, and some really high quality cases that have occurred in a little bit more complex terrain with higher vertical elevation changes, have also shed light on the terrain process and really helped us to understand that what's happening is as the inflow hits your terrain feature, it's actually going to change the direction of that inflow, either for the benefit or for the demise of the wind shear. So when you have the, you know, depending on the approach angle in that terrain, if you are actually enhancing the curvature to your wind field in a manner that's going to enhance and augment the convergence and the low level, like we're talking about like below 100 meter now vertical wind shear, that's actually going to be beneficial to the tornado. On the other hand, depending upon that approach angle, it might have the opposite effect, or as it's, you know, going downhill, it does one thing, as it goes uphill, it does another thing. And numerical simulations have been very helpful in that regard. As I mentioned, the land cover is a little bit stickier, so that is a little bit more, again, that's a little bit more nebulous. And I would say we have, even observationally with the radar data sets that I've been working with, we have better statistical correlation between terrain and changes in tornado intensity than we do with land cover. And that's probably only about a 50-50 compared to like 75% versus 25%.
That is so interesting. So, I mean, there are some places where we have people who ardently believe that, you know, their particular mountain or feature, you know, what have you, plays some critical role in either where tornadoes go or in their intensification or not. And what I'm hearing you say is that it's extremely conditional. And, you know, so what would be your advice with the best of what's known in the science right now? Should people do things like consider where to build homes, or, you know, I mean, this is a conversation some people have, like maybe we should build, you know, more in the valleys instead of on the top of the hills, or, you know, like are there things people who live in these, you know, tornado prone places should think about? Or is the state of the science such that it just looks like, okay, maybe it has an influence, but it's such a conditional thing, and that you could have a tornado come at you twice, and if it happens in from a slightly different direction, and it could with perhaps other things going on too, it could do two totally different things. Is that correct?
Yeah. So if you look at a geographic, like kind of GIS based hotspot analysis, for example, so you're plotting terrain versus specific locations of tornado onset, so your tornado genesis points. There are certain terrain features, I'm thinking specifically like Sand Mountain, for example, in Alabama, that are almost, you can't argue that they are prone to tornadoes in certain areas. And there's also a degree of like, why more? Like, why is it always more? So what is happening in more that it seems to like channel it? And, the supercells are forming in similar sort of areas, but they do have the opportunity to track slightly different tracks. But, why is it more and why is it not Norman, for example? Or why is it not, further north up into, Midwest City or something like that? And for those of you not familiar with the geography of Central Oklahoma, basically these are all towns along the I-35 corridor that are separated by mere miles from each other, and it's basically one continuous suburban metro from Norman all the way north up until Edmond area. So the question is, what is it about more specifically? I think there are certain instances where there are external factors that do drive tornado and perhaps supercell behavior. And in those instances, it might be wise to take a look at the distribution of points. I can tell you, if I ever move back to Oklahoma, I'm not moving to Moore. And to take a look at things like that when you're looking at building a house, for example. There are also sort of the opposite side of the spectrum people, like, for example, where I live in southeastern Ohio, we don't get a lot of tornadoes, but we do periodically. In fact, I actually, for the very first time in my life even, had to shelter from a tornado last summer. And this is in my house in Ohio. Now, granted, when I was in Oklahoma, I was always out chasing, so it's not exactly a fair comparison there. So I was never actually at home when the tornado threat existed. But my neighbors across the street, we live in a low area. Colloquially around here they call them hollers, but it's like a hollow or like a low spot with two ridges on either side. And the neighbors, who by the way live in a mobile home, refused to leave. I went over and I knocked on their door, and we were in a tornado warning, and there was literally like a mesocyclone with not a TVS, but like a mesocyclone that was coming at us. And I was like, you can come over to our house, like it's safer and more sturdy over here. And they said, no, it's not going to hit because we live in this hollow. And it's that kind of pervasive mentality that you're like, come on. And now I don't think they even really understood who they were talking to in the context of my professional repertoire. They know I do something weather, and I do something at the university. But there is that pervasive local mentality as well on the flip side of that, which is very dangerous because, depending on the storm approach, you might luck out one time, but the next time you don't. So really, I just wish to portray this idea that you just don't know. So don't think you're protected because the river's there, or because there was an Indian burial ground, just outside of town or something along those lines. These folklores, while in some instances may seem to hold true, at some time always typically break down.
Yeah, Jana, I know you've lived in Norman before. I'll just urge caution talking about Norman not having tornadoes at this point, because Kim, others may take exception. I'm just kidding, but it is a prevalent belief still, no matter what evidence you present to people, that Moore has many more tornadoes than Norman does, or the Canadian River somehow has an influence. And I don't know, does any of I think you've already maybe kind of touched on it, but I don't hear anything in your research that says yes or no on either of these things. Certainly the terrain features around here, the terrain differences between Moore and Norman, or anywhere around here or just aren't. I don't think they're anything nearly as significant as some of the places you've been studying. So I guess I'm just looking for. I get this question all the time, and no matter what answer I give, they just stare at me and go, "Mm-hmm, yeah, right. Move on." Move on, science person. You can't tell us that Moore doesn't have more tornadoes. So I'm rambling, but is there any ammunition or any talking points, anything based on anything that you've looked at that kind of help, I don't know, make the point, argue the point one way or another?
And I'll just add to that really quick, Jana. I mean, you're talking about with the even more Norman distinction. It's something that even as scientists, we're humans and we see things and like we are just as subject to all of the factors that govern risk perception as everybody else. And there have been a lot of aspects that have made the Moore tornadoes just so visible in the social consciousness. And something I think about is, Rick is asking about, for your research, the degree to which we have a physical basis, to maybe think there could be distinction. I'm going to channel my inner Harold Brooks here and ask, do we have a climatological basis? Do we even have a long enough period of record to say that one point is statistically discernibly different from another? And, I mean, I didn't buy my house in Moore. I did buy right next to Moore. I'm very close to it. But my husband laughed at me because I'm such this this is my gospel. The gospel, according to Kim, is there. We don't know enough to say that one point is different from another. And, but it does play into your mind. It does. It played into our minds too. So just curious what your thoughts are on, Rick was asking if there is to your research for some place like Central Oklahoma, any basis to believe that terrain feature might be part of this particular story.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you guys followed up on that because I think I communicated my story in one way that wasn't necessarily an intentional way. So from a pure numbers standing, really, I'm trying to think back on like my maps in my brain here. But, to my immediate recollection, I can think of in the last, 10, 15 years, 4 tornadoes that have impacted Norman. And, on the other hand, the Moore tornadoes are very obviously, catastrophic. And so our minds, our memories tend to focus on those events because they were so pronounced, they were so covered by the media. We saw visual images of houses leveled, of debris fields. And so, those are the things that we as humans are recalling and are remembering. But, just in the time that I lived in Norman, which was those 8 years, there were at least 4 tornadoes that impacted some area of Norman. Now, they were weaker tornadoes, so they didn't get the press coverage. It went through the park and blew a bunch of branches down from the trees. It knocked a swing set over, kind of a thing. So those things are more easily forgotten. Now, when we talk about the actual scientific evidence, I am not aware of, in either my studies or in others' studies, any kind of physical basis for there to be a difference between Moore and Norman. And yeah, in terms of longevity, we have, we're working on maybe 70 years of climo information as far as tornado reports. And some, half of those years, maybe not quite half of those, but a third of those years, it's questionable how great the climo even is for that. So perhaps we don't have a long enough lasting record. So I would say that we really can't attribute any difference in terms of Moore versus Norman, Central Oklahoma areas to anything that's terrain related or related to the river or anything like that. The one thing I will say is that there does appear to be a correlation with the initiation locations downstream from the Wichita Mountains. So the Wichita Mountains in southwestern Oklahoma, under flow that is coming from the south, will tend to initiate storms in a favored area to the north and to the perhaps northeast of the mountains. And then you have to extrapolate downstream where those storms ultimately end up going. So that is something scientific that could perhaps play a little bit of a role in the ultimate destination of where those storms end up.
I'm going to pass this over to Troy in a second, but that's fascinating. We tend to think about this question as, well, what is it about the terrain right there at that spot? And it could actually be about the terrain that's upstream of you. And if that determines whether storms will fire, if they'll intensify, what's happening upstream of you. A really interesting framework. Thank you, Jana. And Troy, go ahead.
Well, Jana, Troy Kimmel, and again, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having us, letting us talk to you tonight. I think it's interesting that you bring this up, and I would kind of maybe pull you a little bit toward the Rolling Fork tornado this last Friday night. Since that storm, Jana, started out around Lake Providence there in Louisiana on the Mississippi River, and went across the area. And granted, I was just checking the sea level. I wanted to see what Rolling Fork was compared to Lake Providence in that area, and it's about the same, a little over 100 feet. But the one thing that I learned from this and watching that event, and it was just the massive amount of land cover that's agricultural in that area around Rolling Fork, while the city is almost a little island where these homes were and where the tornado hit. Quick question: when you began to hear about this Friday night and over the weekend, was there anything about this storm that got your attention, the Rolling Fork tornado?
Yeah, so I've got to admit, I didn't do any kind of investigation into the terrain of the area, and I'm not particularly familiar with the terrain. So really, my analysis was looking at the radar data, looking at what the storm structure was, and I guess I can speak to that in terms of, the warning decision making that happened there, because initially this storm at its inception really didn't look like much. And I'll actually say that that also goes for the most recent Norman tornado that we just had a month ago. It started out as basically this line segment that really was pretty marginal looking and nothing that would have, triggered my instinct as like, oh, we got to watch that. And then very quickly, you start to see a little bit of rotation and then that storm really hooked into itself. That storm now referring to the Rolling Fork tornado. And I've got to give the forecasters credit because they basically just had, one volume scan where you have a little bit of cyclonic rotation there, and they were on the trigger for that. And that was really good decision making, especially considering the situational awareness, the fact that the low level environment was just so primed. The vertical wind shear over that lowest 1 kilometer or so was really, really substantial. And so they were on it, and they made that decision in really, really good time. So I can speak to it from that sense. But considering, the idea that it's transitioning over a land cover feature that has relatively low friction and basically seemed to kind of ramp up just after it crossed over that lake. I'm not surprised by that, in all honesty, actually, in a physical science sense, because what happens is when you increase the friction at the surface, it actually decreases rotation and increases convergence. So it's kind of a weird way of thinking about the science, but what the friction does is it disrupts that cyclostrophic balance between the inward directed pressure gradient force and the outward directed centrifugal force. So by removing friction, by adding friction, you are essentially weakening your velocity, which is weakening the cyclostrophic the outward directed centrifugal force, allowing everything to come together. And it's a conservation of angular momentum problem. So you're actually bringing things to a tighter radius than what you otherwise would in the absence of friction or in reduced friction. So you at the end result is that friction actually makes your low level near ground vertical vorticity or rotation be stronger than in the case where the friction is absent. So it's this awkward kind of paradox in the physics here. So probably what was happening is you had a little bit of near ground rotation that once you transition the land cover from that low friction water to the higher friction trees and undergrowth, actually allowed for greater convergence, which actually allowed that tornado to intensify or to develop in a manner that perhaps it might not have had that gradient been absent.
Well, Jennifer, grew up part of my life in Mississippi, although I'm native Texan. The amazing thing was how the Weather Service in Jackson, who did an amazing job, as you point out, and also the TV Mets in Jackson, who I watched during that time. When it got past Rolling Fork, everyone was coming out and saying, okay, we know this is over agricultural land now. We realize that there's not an immediate threat, but these cities upstream. And it took me, Jana, going and looking at a Google map and satellite view to realize it's just miles and miles and miles of agricultural fields until you get up closer to the next city that was affected by that when you got up a little bit. So, I mean, they just did really an amazing job, both the media standpoint and National Weather Service Jackson, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. I will agree with that. I didn't see the media coverage, but yeah, they play a crucial role in informing and communicating the risk with the general audience.
And hey, Troy, I got to say, I saw a video clip where some Fox weather or news anchors said it struck without warning. So that meme is already out there. It's already out there. I'll try and dig that up and make it. And what's bad, there's like a meteorologist that was talking with him, and he didn't say anything. He didn't defend the process. And again, you know what happens? It just discredits the whole thing.
Yeah.
But it seemed to me that one.
Yeah, but James, in a way, James from Tulsa brought up a good point in some of our discussions back over the weekend that maybe there are two types of warnings. There's a warning that we as weather dweebs know, and those are TORJANs, that came out of Jackson, Mississippi, and whether the public was ready for what happened in a way, and that type of warning. And that's the only thing, although I agree with you. I saw the Fox video and I'm sitting there shaking my head. I'm angry almost when I saw that, but I'll let James from Tulsa talk about that a little bit. I thought he brought some very interesting points in his discussion this weekend.
Yeah, and if you want me to jump into that first, we had a tornado at the end of March in 2015 in Tulsa. EF2, it did kill a gentleman in a mobile home. It made 4 water crossings on its path and was strongest, I know, after at least one of those water crossings, and that's where the fatality occurred, and that's where they found EF2 damage indicators. But to your point, Troy, about the warnings, we hear that struck without warning, but we look at it from the meteorological standpoint of, yeah, I saw the product. The product is the warning. But these people have had an extreme event completely unsettle everything they knew, their whole status quo. And to them, that upsetting came without warning. That disruption of their life, this extreme disruption, their lives are never going to be the same again because of this. And I think, we all owe it to ourselves to have a little bit of grace when we hear someone that's not meteorological say that.
I'm going to jump back to the land use, land cover topic, because this is another thing we're probably going to get into is the rating of the tornado intensity, the EF scale rating. And, we hear the 59.6 mile long path or whatever it was, and you have an idea of a long track tornado. With this tornado and with lots of tornadoes, the vast majority of that track was spin over, like Troy said, open farmland, where you would be hard pressed to even get an EF2 rating out there, much less anything close to a 5. The only opportunity for even a EF4 or 5 rating was when it hit Rolling Fork, or when it hit Silver City, or when it hit an actual populated area. So just because it's a long track tornado in this case, certainly there's opportunities along the path for things to be hit. But in this case, that it was minimal opportunities even for it to be rated higher. We're jumping all over the place, but I wanted to throw that in.
No, this is all perfectly, commensurate with just the idea of terrain influence and what does that look like. And I think it's a really interesting point to raise, this whole conversation everyone is having now about, could the tornado have gotten an EF5 rating? So Rick, from what you're saying, it sounds like hitting, I mean, right through the core of Rolling Rock. Do we know if there were buildings that were substantial enough that were affected that the EF5 determination could have even been considered? Or is this another case where it's EF4 by default?
That's a great question. I'm not privy to any of the, the nitty gritty details of the survey. I've looked in the DAT to see how they rated things and wind speeds and things like that. And it's, it's clear, it's solid EF4 in multiple locations along the path of that particular tornado. But I just don't know without being there on the ground. I mean, just some of the news coverage and what little I've seen, I would lean toward it would probably be difficult, depending on who's doing the survey, to rate something an EF5. I'm not even going to mention what James' comment just was, something he saw on Twitter. I can't even let it come out of my mouth. But there are, I think people don't realize there are minimal opportunities, even when it hits a town like Rolling Fork. There just may not be a structure there that would support reading in an EF5. Of the 26 damage indicators that we have to rate damage from a tornado, there's only 10 of them that will even get you to an EF5. And those are things like school buildings, hospitals, apartment buildings. The most common one, and that is almost always used, is a single family home. And it's pretty difficult to get to an EF5 on that without some compelling evidence. So I don't know. I haven't seen any evidence, but there seems to be high confidence in that EF4 rating.
Well, thank you for giving us what you knew about all of that. It's an interesting conversation that's going on. The hospital was hit, wasn't it? In that area, but of course,
I think it was
directly hit or glancing blow.
I think it was more of a glancing blow. What I could tell, the hospital's on the west side of the city, and it may have been kind of south. The path may have been a little bit south of the community hospital there in Rolling Fork.
Yep. So there's a lot of complexity that goes into this. It's not just, are you hit? Are you squarely hit? And so the structure has to not only be affected, but, very significantly so, to really achieve this. So it is a high bar. So the conversations that are going on where people are convinced there were EF5 tornadoes that have happened since more, but none have gotten that rating. It's a really interesting conversation. And this is something that's been hotly debated. Jana has been part of this community back when you were a graduate student. And then I think just after when we had the whole conversation about the El Reno tornado and how it should have been rated, given the data that was on the ground with mobile radars. And, it's do we have a database that compares apples to apples, or do we allow some oranges to slip in when we have better information about direct measurement of wind speed? It is a really interesting conversation, and I'll just leave that right there with, I sympathize with people who have frustration. It is a frustrating place to live, and it's what we have. So with that, let's go to other frustrations. Jen wants to raise another great issue that this event brought to the fore. Jen, go for it.
Yeah, first of all, Dr. Jana, if I was in school again, I would take a class from you in a heartbeat. I'm learning so much from you. And I certainly did at the Ohio State Symposium. It was so wonderful to hear you talk there. But I'm going to take us down a side dirt road and talk about chasing, because this was a huge topic and it actually became part of the news, was chasing, some of it not good and some of it was positive. So I thought we could maybe kind of talk about that a little bit, but since you have chased and so has Kim and others. I have only chased one time and it was just a quick trip, and I do not seek to chase. I don't feel confident in doing it, and I don't feel confident in doing it by myself. I chase stuff on the radio or I chase tornado history, but I'm not one who goes to chase. And there's a lot of folks that do. And I know of at least 2 incidences on Friday night where chasers got way too close, in fact, so close that they got hit. and cars are rolled and into fields and all that. And then they're posting about it. They've had to take their streams down and all these different things. And then there were many chasers that had some close calls. And then there were chasers that were out and got footage of like rolling fork and then stopped and did search and rescue. And some were, doing emergency, rescues and pulling people from the debris and doing CPR and all that kind of stuff. Where are we going with chasing? First of all, should we be chasing in the Delta region at night? And where are we going? What is the goal of chasing?
Yeah, so I think, all of the points that you bring up are incredibly important to talk about and deserve a larger scale discussion than what we can even give that right here. I like to think of chasers as having kind of three different, I guess you could throw a fourth in there, but there's kind of three groups of chasers. One group is out there for scientific purposes. Okay, these are people who are going out, who are affiliated with some kind of research entity, who have instrumentation, who are doing science, and who are out specifically for data collection to improve our current understanding. Those individuals tend to be cautious. They are operating with $1 million+ instruments in many cases, and we don't want to compromise. I say we because I consider myself part of this community. We don't want to compromise a $1 million instrument by driving it through gigantic hail that's going to break it, by getting it too close to a tornado where we become incapacitated. And frankly, NSF would not be happy, and we would have a lot of answering to do for things like that. Then there's a second group that I would say are responsible chasers who are out there because they love the storms. They'd like to, and there might even be a degree of adrenaline seeking that goes along with that as well, but they are making responsible decisions. They are communicating with like the National Weather Service, for example, and spotters and storm chasers still play a vital role in informing the National Weather Service and even on-air broadcast meteorologists with where there's the tornado actually occurring. What does it look like? If you get yourself out of the central United States, which is an anomaly from the standpoint of, Oklahoma City's throwing up 3 helicopters in the air to track these tornadoes. If you get yourself out of the central part of the United States, where media outlets just don't have those resources, spotters are really playing a very crucial role in confirming what is actually happening on the ground, because we can only derive so much information from remotely located radars. Most radars, most locations aren't going to have access to a mobile radar, for example. Those are few and far between. And even when there is a mobile radar out there, generally there's not an ability to live stream, so to speak, the radar data that's coming in that are being collected by that instrument. So those are being processed, but they're being stored to analyze at a later time. So chasers still have a responsibility to be communicating with the NWS and informing them of how to communicate their messages. Do you actually have a spotter confirmed tornado that is occurring? But then there's and by the way, those are also, I kind of group in, those are the ones who are still taking safety considerations on the road. They're not getting too close to the tornado. They are going to be the responsible citizens who stop, who see, a house and go check if somebody needs help. And then you have this third group who are just kind of, like the wild, wild west, who are out there to get as close as they possibly can at whatever expense they have to make to sell their video and to get people to watch them, and to make money, really. And those are the people that I frankly think we need to be the most concerned about. And unfortunately, those are also the people that the public eats up. The public feeds this frenzy, really, and the impact that is received by the media, by the outlets, by the public to these wild and crazy storm chasers is contributing to the problem that we have. And unfortunately, those are the ones who are, in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, who are making reckless decisions, who are endangering the lives of other people around them, and who are just kind of really out there for their own, for their own purposes. So I feel like, it's while they are probably a small percentage, they're the most visible percentage of chasers, and they are the ones that are ultimately giving chasers a bad name.
Well,
Who's banging around here?
right?
Are y'all hear that?
That's
And
my
the thing
dog.
is-
That's my dog's tail
Okay.
on my chair.
I thought somebody was hammering here. I mean, who's building something here? What is this?
That's amazing. Yeah, that is definitely the top contender for show title right now.
Yeah.
So sorry, we're having such a great discussion in the chat that I'm looking back to see who even want to, Rick, could you weigh in a little bit on what you know about the damage surveying process? And you mentioned that there was just some discussion going on about storm chasers doing things for their own, image and bravado. But there were some scientific field project folks who have been out there who have lent a hand. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The Perils Project, and we're National Organization for the Advancement of Acronyms. Please don't ask me to tell you what Perils stands for.
Show title.
It is a QLCS tornado experiment that's going on in the southeast, and I guess part of what they do is if there's an event like this, they actually can go out and do surveys. They have some capability to do UAS or drones. So I do know that some of the Perils researchers did go and supplement some of the Jackson survey teams. And I know Jackson must have been super appreciative of that, because that's a tremendous amount of work. So I don't know all the details, but I do know that those folks, people from Birmingham and others that were involved in that project, did go to help with that survey. So that helped to fill in a lot of those gaps for sure.
Yeah, and I know also that there were some storm chasers that basically acted like emergent first responders since they were first on the scene, and they actually transported some injured people down to the hospital in Vicksburg. I think that's the next closest hospital that could deal with that level of trauma.
It's good to tip our hat to those folks who go and help and do the right thing. And there were certainly a lot of people who needed the help. So while we can debate whether they should have been there, whether it was smart, if they're going to be there, I would hope that going into that they would maybe, if you're going to chase and be in these situations, if you could have some of that training on, sort of at least very basic medical practice to be a helpful hand, then we'll tip our hat to you for doing the right thing. Something that I'd love to raise, Jana, you mentioned that you've done work on tornado genesis. Something that was a feature of this event that I think has gotten a lot of discussion is there was a question about, man, how far in advance can we talk about the likelihood that this storm will go on to produce a tornado? And what does it take to produce a tornado? What does that genesis process look like? I'll really quickly say, just for this event, there was some conversation about the Storm Prediction Center in particular putting out some mesoscale convective discussions that are small scale and, targeting sort of this area and being, sort of thoughtful about before one would issue a warning, having some focus brought to this. But I do, Jen, want to bring you to your area of particular expertise, which is that tornado genesis piece. It's such a challenging thing to know when a storm is going to go from being a storm perhaps with high base rotation down to, all right, there's a connection with the ground. Talk a little bit about the science of tornado genesis. What all is known about how tornadoes form, and what have you added to that knowledge base?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I love talking about this, so I could talk about it for a long time. So we'll see where the conversation takes us. What we have learned, both in terms of mobile radar observations as well as from the numerical modeling domain, is that tornadoes really don't form from the cloud and progress downward with time. This is actually an optical illusion because our eye is cueing in on the funnel cloud, and that's what the funnel cloud is doing. But that's not necessarily what the actual rotation is doing. So to illustrate this, if we think about the fact that this has everything to do with the vertical profile of temperature and moisture in the atmosphere, actually. So as you go up, air cools, and as it cools, it's going to have a relative humidity that gets higher. So what rotation does is it actually induces condensation at a slightly lower relative humidity value than 100%, because rotation will actually decrease pressure locally. So the low pressure actually allows the air to condense at a temperature and humidity that it wouldn't otherwise condense if the rotation weren't there. But as you get closer to the cloud, you are automatically getting to areas where the relative humidity is going to be higher. So add the same amount of rotation throughout your air column, the exact same amount. And what are you going to see? You're going to see cloud form first at higher levels where your relative humidity values are higher. And then the stronger the rotation is, that cloud is going to be able to form at lower and lower levels. But you have the exact same amount of rotation at the ground as you do at the cloud. So what we end up seeing, our eyes, we're visual beings, right? We cue in on that funnel cloud, and that's what the funnel cloud is doing. It's starting in that cloud and it's coming down to the ground. But the rotation is already present on the ground, oftentimes well before that funnel cloud ever actually visually makes contact with the ground. And what radar data has been able to do, especially these really rapid scanning mobile radars like I was talking about before, they are able to actually pick up on this visual clue, or I guess I should say this lack of a visual clue in the rotation that's happening at the surface, because we have small little dust particles, we have little things in the air that the radar energy is actually reflecting off of. And sometimes rain gets mixed in there too. So what we're finding is that in many cases, we have rotation at the ground that is preceding the actual vertically expansive vortex by sometimes several minutes. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the rotation at the ground is tornado strength for that period of time, but in some cases it is. So for example, the El Reno 2013 tornado, that tornado was like a really big eye opener for me, because I was there, I collected data in the radar, we put together a post-storm analysis and published a paper on it from a radar perspective. And then 2 years later, I read this paper that was written by Anton Simon, and they show a picture of a funnel cloud that is very clearly actually in contact with the ground like a minute and a half earlier than what we as the radar team analyzed as tornado genesis time. So being familiar with this work, I was like, wait, what? Like, how is this possible? Like, how are we seeing? And, visually you couldn't argue that this was a tornado. So after a little bit of digging, what I realized had happened was, in our radar analysis, we did not investigate the data from the lowest elevation angle, which happened to be 0 degrees. So to back up a little bit, the way a radar works is you have electromagnetic energy that's generated, it's transmitted out an antenna, it goes into the atmosphere, it hits things, it could be trees, it could be foam poles, it could be raindrops, it could be hailstones, whatever. And some of that energy is kind of scattered and bounced back to the radar. The radar receives it and it processes it and converts it to a numerical value of reflectivity, of radial velocity, whatever the case is. So typically, in order to scan above things like trees and houses and foam poles, we actually scan on an angle. So this is the horizon on the bottom, and this is the radar beam. So we scan in a way that's going to get us over the top of those ground clutter features. In this particular case, in El Reno, we were deployed on a slight rise in comparison to where the tornado was. So we were actually able to scan. So the ground basically fell out from underneath us and we were scanning straight on. So we were able to scan at this 0 degree elevation angle But when we did our analysis, we just kind of threw that out because we were worried about some ground clutter contamination, not so good. You know, the data aren't super high quality. All right, let's look at 2 degrees and go up from there. And 2 degrees, mind you, had a vertical height of about 300 meters in this particular case. So when I went back and I looked at the 0 degree elevation angle data, lo and behold, there was a tornadic vortex signature only in that 0 degree elevation angle data for 2 minutes almost prior to the development of this deeper tornadic vortex. So this was like, you know, we've suspected, and we've had limited evidence up to this point that this is the case, that tornadoes are really concentrating rotation basically on the ground. And then, you know, you go forward in time and then you have essentially an updraft above it, which is really in the form of a strong low level mesocyclone. And essentially what happens is you have this rotation next to the ground. It gets juxtaposed underneath a vacuum cleaner. The vacuum cleaner sucks it up, pulls it together, and it forms a tornado. This was just an incredibly clear, really the clearest example I've ever seen in my career of how that process can actually exist in independence of that deeper vertical vacuum, for lay person's terms. And yeah, so that really kind of sparked like oh my gosh, like how often is this actually happening? So I expanded that case to 8 additional tornadoes. Some of them were, I think the strongest that we looked at was an EF3, and then a couple weaker tornadoes as well, and applied a variety of different definitions to what makes a tornado. So are we defining a tornado, which by the way is a conversation we can have like for another 40 minutes on what is a tornado, you know, whether we do or whether we don't, whatever. But in those 8 cases that I looked at, in all but 2 of those cases, it was incredibly clear that the vorticity was at the ground first and then grew upward with time. In 2 of the cases, it depended on how you defined a tornado. In a definition of looking at the intensity between that maximum inbound and outbound, the actual value that you set for that changed the implication of the vertical evolution of the tornado. If you used just what's called a pseudo vorticity, which is a kind of a quantification of how far apart those 2 maxima are with the actual value of the difference between those 2, every single case developed from the bottom up.
I'm sorry, I am breathless right now. Are you telling me that there are probably a substantial number of times when we have, well before you even like would visually see like a tornado, the complete tornado from cloud to ground, that we have rotating columns of air that we're not seeing that one might define as a tornado?
Yeah,
that are affecting people, like possibly, and doing stuff like before we would even call it a tornado. It's surface-based upward, you know, rotating column of air from the ground.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And it happens really, it can happen really quickly too. So to kind of elaborate upon that, oftentimes this process of where you go from essentially, and by the way, you know, this, I would say that happens sometimes, the process that I described with the El Reno tornado. I don't know how ubiquitous it is. It's definitely not every case, but we have such a few number of really high quality data points to our sample that it's really hard to know how common this actually is. I will say that I also saw tornadoes that went from basically what looked like nothing to a full-fledged tornado in a time frame of less than 60 seconds. So basically 2 to maybe 3 radar scans, and you go from kind of converging to all of a sudden you have a tornado from the ground all the way through 3 kilometers or so. So I mean, this has major implications for the operational weather sector, because it's really, I mean, how are you ever going to forecast that? You're not. And you know, even the most skilled operational meteorologists, we will never be able to get rid of the false alarm problem with, at least in the current stage of where we're at in using radar data. And even just looking, we look for signs, right? That's how operational meteorologists make their calls on how to make warnings. They look for the intensification of rotation. They look for visual cues in the reflectivity field where you have a spiraling hook echo that's starting to spin up. They take situational awareness into consideration. What is the environment like? Is this going to be an environment that's going to be supportive of the generation of a large tornado or even just a tornado? But ultimately, like given what we currently have to work with, I am confident that we will never be able to accurately warn tornadoes. We have to go to a different paradigm.
Jana, your comment, that's just fascinating stuff. And, one of the things we do is we do storm spotter training classes, and this just really hammers home the point that we hit hard in spotter training, that the tornado is not the cloud, it's the wind. And you can't always see that. And certainly that was brought home in a very dramatic and tragic fashion with that same tornado, where you can't really see the tornado itself fully. So I know we have a lot of emergency managers, spotters, chasers that listen to WeatherBrains, and that just reinforces the point that caution, safety is even more important. You think you know what you're looking at, you think you know what you're looking for, but what you can't see can definitely hurt you.
Dr. Hauser, how good can we get issuing tornado warnings as operational meteorologists? James wants to know, I want to know, Rick wants to know. We're sort of imprisoned in the way we're doing it right now, with really no hope for radars every 5 miles or spotters every 5 miles. How do we get better at this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important question. And really, I think the pathway forward has to be through things like, oh my gosh, my brain just totally went blank. Somebody help me out with the probabilistic forecasting.
I was going to say probabilistic hazard, like put forward probabilistic hazard information instead of the determinism, going toward quantifying, all right, what kinds of environments coupled with the way that these storms are evolving, having this combination of like sort of a machine learning on, like storm attributes and the mesoscale analysis. Something
exactly. Like yeah. So I was looking for warn on forecast. That's what I was trying to come up with in that space right there. Yes. So Kim really did a nice job of summarizing what that is basically. So you have high resolution numerical models that are assimilating observations hourly, perhaps even more frequently than hourly. They are fine enough spatial resolution that you can at least discern if you have like a tornado-like vortex occurring in the model field. And you're, running these models at very short-term increments and running them out for only a few hours at a time. And ultimately, if you see a signal in the model that there is perhaps going to be a tornado, and then observationally you see a storm in a similar location as what's happening in the model, that's when we improve our opportunities and our ability to actually warn. And that's when you can issue that warning ahead of time based on a model's probability of a tornado actually happening rather than the observations.
We used a lot at my place, the warn on forecast stuff that was being generated as we talked about, and it was great last year. It was really great. But again, we're still not able to narrow it down as tightly as, of course, any of us want to. And then we're not even getting into the whole, probably the Grand Canyon of how you communicate probabilistic tornado threat.
Man, yeah, communicating this can be so challenging, in part because when you look at output from, say, warn on forecast, it could do a really good job rendering, this will be a case where we'll get just a handful of storms that'll pop up, but and then they'll be long tracked, but there could be displacement of 30 miles north or south, which completely changes what it's going to hit, where the storm will be effective. It's not just, can we communicate probabilistic information like in graphs and charts? It's also maps. There's a spatial uncertainty aspect and a coverage piece to that are just really challenging to render in such a way that we can connect with people's decision making, because they're really wanting to know that question, where will it be? And sometimes that's fairly clear because there's a boundary or something, you know, at the mesoscale that's influential, and sometimes it's just not at all that clear. And so yeah, it's a very interesting challenge. I think it's interesting in SSL that they're running a I think it's MRMS based, so sort of a climatological machine learning algorithm that puts forward just the first guess path that what for a storm that is ongoing, what's the likelihood that this storm will produce a tornado downstream over the next hour? And they had, I think, for that storm, well before it was warned, it was running something like fairly high probabilities. They were saying 80% and an exceedance of 80% chance. And it's the kind of thing where you look at that and you think, okay, for people who are in vulnerable housing and who actually don't just think they're in a holler and don't have to care, you know, like there's a lot of conditionals here to the decision process. But for people who are looking for that extra time that you need to evacuate successfully, to flee, to even just a neighbor's home or, you know, family member's home. If you heard that there was a storm coming your way, that maybe there's not a tornado now, but it's really likely by about the time it gets to you, I think that that's, from a decision science perspective, that's part of what we're going to need. And I agree with you, Jana. I think for the physical science reasons and the social science reasons, determinism can only get us so far. And where we're going to meet people's decision needs is really going to be where we're starting to understand, okay, all these factors that govern tornadogenesis. How likely can we get things down to giving you an estimate of just how likely it is? Because we can't observe directly. We're going to have to do some inferential work here. So, you know, Jana, thinking about the work that you're doing with mobile radars, you have also talked with me a little bit about some other applications of your work, and that you're working also with civil engineers with some of this, because they're really interested in realistic renderings of what tornadoes near the surface, what those vortices are really like, because it turns out that the way we design buildings, it may be influenced more by very simplistic representations of what tornadoes are like, rather than the complex reality. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing that intersects with civil engineering and building design?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd also just like to back up a split second too. This kind of dovetails nicely with that discussion here. Just from the idea of the fact that our models, you're right, they're not perfect right now, and we still have a ways to go. There's a lot of problems that we still need to address. You know, even things as simple as convection initiation. Like, when do these storms actually? When are we going to actually expect storms to initiate and begin? Not to mention, you know, produce a feature that's maybe 200, 300 meters across. But that's why the work that I'm doing and others who are in the field are doing is so critically important, because we're ultimately really trying to, you know, put the pieces together of this puzzle. And, you know, we have like 1,000-piece puzzle, or maybe a 5,000, or maybe a 10,000-piece puzzle, you know, a humongous puzzle. And the more pieces of scientific information that we can put into place, the clearer view we can ultimately get, so that we can get to a point, maybe in 20 years, maybe in 50 years, where our models are good enough because we've informed our models based on what we've observed and based on how we're seeing friction be handled, for example, and how, you know, how we're visualizing and understanding these processes within the storm and within the environment that lead up to tornadogenesis. And each of those pieces that we can configure is going to improve our ability to ultimately end up, hopefully, predicting these tornadoes in considerably greater temporal advance than what we can currently do. So leading into the discussion about the engineering side of things, you know, this is another critically important piece of the tornado puzzle, because, you know, a tornado in a field is, yeah, gonna, you know, rip up some grass and might uproot a tree or knock something over. But when the tornadoes are impacting humans in our structures, really, and it's this interface between the physical science and the tornado science with the engineering side of things that's really critically important to humanity ultimately. So I'm working with a civil engineer right now, and we're putting together a grant proposal to really look at how tornado winds are impacting structure on ultra fine scale. So in the meteorological context, I mean, our minds are going to be blown by the idea that this model is like several, has grid resolution on the order of roughly millimeters. So super ultra fine spatial resolution. But historically, the winds that have been fed to these engineering models are based upon simplistic vortex dynamics and configurations. So basically just, ranking type vortex where tornado winds increase from, the core out to, or from the center axis of rotation out to the radius of maximum winds, and then exponentially decrease with radius away from it. So what we are proposing to do is to utilize observed tornado wind fields from three-dimensionally reconstructed grids where you take two radars and you geometrically calculate the UV and W wind components. These are called dual Doppler analyses. And we supply those dual Doppler analyzed wind syntheses to this high resolution engineering model to get a better feel for how a realistic wind field around a tornado is ultimately going to impact a building. So in our proposal, we have a variety of different intensities of observed tornadoes that we're going to use. We have several different actual structures. So we have like a multiple vortex configuration. We have a strong one cell tornado, which is dominated by updraft in the center. We have a two cell tornado, which has downdraft in the center, surrounded by a ring of updraft. And then we have a variety of different intensities. And then we're also going to compare those results with what we see in a more traditional simplistic representation of a tornado wind field. So like the Rankine vortex, for example, or the Burgers-Rot vortex. So that's going to help us, one, determine, can we get away with using these simple models? And if we can, great, then that kind of eases our load of having to, use something more complicated to figure things out. I suspect, though, that what we're going to actually end up finding is that there's substantial differences between these simplified vortex wind flow configurations and what we actually get in nature, and the implications of those more complicated dynamics and kinematics within the tornado on the physical structures at the ground. So the engineer is going to be looking at wind loading, looking at things like, when's a garage door bust, for example, and how does that, busted garage door contribute to the overall catastrophic failure of a housing structure, for example. How, they can do things like vary the types of joists that are used, vary the different types of actual hardware that's used to connect joists to additional beams. I'm forgetting the architecture terms here, sorry. But all of that can be then used to design structures, to inform construction practices, to make buildings in a form where they are less likely to fail as a result of a tornado.
Thank you for going through all of that. I think it's so interesting for us to think about, what can we do? If we had a more intelligent understanding of this interaction between tornadic winds and what they're really like and how they interact with structures. And I'm curious, just thinking forward, what are some of the most promising applications of work like this for helping to keep our public safe from tornadoes?
Yeah, I mean, this is really going to ideally be used to inform building codes and building practices and procedures. It's a little bit unfortunate that sometimes there's a disconnect between the ideal building code and what actually gets built. But this will hopefully help create a better informed set of building standards that ideally will be implemented, particularly across areas that are prone to large damaging tornadoes.
So let me ask you, Kim, and I saw some chat traffic on this. Are you planning to go to Rolling Fork and Silver City to review what happened there from the social side?
I need to chat with the team. I would be stunned if the members of my team who we've done a couple of studies now. We just started to do these comprehensive studies, I would be stunned if they didn't feel very strongly about trying to understand more about this event. Something that's been interesting to me about it has been the conversation about the dissemination of the warning and the reliance on different kinds of technologies and if they failed or not, and just what's the correspondence between the issuance time and the message received time and all the decisions that were made and the situations that these people found themselves in, would just be really very interesting to explore. Also, just anytime that you have a downtown hit, especially in the rural South, you have a very particular set of social considerations, things that are going on, and there are different kinds of structures involved than just when tornadoes tend to go through residential areas, suburbs, exurbs. Here we have a lot of mixed structure types and very interesting kinds of decisions people might have been making in a small town where they have a lot of different kinds of structures available to them to consider if they had some time to think about where to go. And I think that there's a lot in that could be very revealing and interesting. So we'll chat more if that's something that I or others might be tackling.
Well, you need to go. You need to go because what happens, we all draw our conclusions. And that doesn't mean anything unless you got data and you understand how to collect data and you understand the culture. Cam, a lot of people don't. A lot of people would go into Rolling Fork, Mississippi with a condescending attitude, coming in there as an academic pinhead, treating these people horribly. You treat them with empathy and compassion, and you understand them. And I've heard that over and over from people where you've come in doing this work. And so that's why I'm hoping that you do go, because, again, something obviously could be done better here. Warnings look good on paper, but, we just have to be better at the messaging side of this whole thing and understand where people are and what they need and how we can all do better. So I'm very excited about that. And we'll continue this discussion here in just a minute. And by the way, I think I've gained 10 IQ points listening to this show. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like, Jana, you're good. Now, I hope you can stay for a few more minutes here because we have to do picks of the week. So be thinking of something really cool. A lot of the stuff that, I watch on YouTube, my IQ drops 10 points. So I have regained those 10 points in their back. But we do have to take a break here. We're going to go to Tony Rice and his astronomy report. We've got Jen This Week in Tornado History, Bruce Jones of Midland Radio, and I know Bruce has some thoughts about what happened in Mississippi. And by the way, let me just say this too before we go to the break here. Understand that same parent storm dropped another tornado. For a while, it went without one. Another one got down and hit Amory, Mississippi, which is really close to where I am, and that put me on television about 10:45 Friday night, and that thing looked horrific. On the Columbus Air Force Base radar coming up into Marion County, Alabama. And the Weather Service in Birmingham issued a tornado emergency based on that radar signature, which was right. And by the grace of God, there was an occlusion process and the thing choked itself off. And then it did generate 2 more tornadoes in Alabama. So it was a rough night. And again, we're going to do a weather roundup and much more. But let's pause for Tony and Jen. We'll be right back as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
This week, look to the western horizon after sunset for 4 visible planets: Jupiter, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Early in the week, Jupiter and Mercury will be side by side, low on the western horizon. The brighter one is Jupiter. As the week wears on, Mercury will be a little higher and a little easier to see, and Jupiter a little closer to the horizon and dimmer as we look through more and more atmosphere, 10 air masses more by Friday. The most prominent, that's Venus. And if you aren't completely socked in with clouds, you can't miss it. Up and to the left of Venus is Uranus, but I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time looking for it. You may have seen some articles about the 5 planets visible this week. Uranus, that's the 5th, but at 10,000 times dimmer than Venus, you'll need at least a moderate-sized telescope to see it in a pretty dark sky. Finally, nearly overhead, look for Mars. It has a noticeably orange-red color. The moon will also be moving through the scene this week. Monday night, the waxing crescent moon will be between Venus and Mars. By Tuesday, the first quarter moon will have moved above Mars. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, the Palm Sunday outbreak of March 27th, 1994. It was a devastating day across the South. Per the Storm Prediction Center, there were 29 tornadoes across 5 states: Texas, Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, too. 7 were rated F3 and 2 were given a rating of F4. We have a summary at tornadotalk.com that reviews the most deadly tornado of the outbreak and the deadliest for 1994. It was an F4 that moved 50 miles through St. Clair, Calhoun, and Cherokee counties in Alabama. It lifted just over the Georgia state line in Floyd County. There were 150 people injured from this tornado and 22 fatalities. Most of those occurred at the Goshen United Methodist Church in Cherokee County, Alabama. Thomas Grzoulis and significant tornadoes shared the following from Tim Marshall, a member of the National Weather Service survey team. He stated in the May-June 1994 issue of Storm Track magazine, quote, "The steep gable roof of the church acted like a sail to catch the wind. The heavy timber roof lifted slightly and shifted, then the sanctuary walls and the roof fell in unison to the north. Church members were caught without warning. The walls had no intervening columns or lateral braces. As a result, falling masonry crushed persons in the southern half of the sanctuary. A long hallway next to the sanctuary could have provided safe haven as it remained untouched."
Let me just say that Jen, is a very personal story for me. I was the first to deliver a sermon in the Goshen United Methodist Church when they moved in their new building. And the first thing, I'll never forget the first thing I said, if you're looking for a theological reason as to why this happened, I'm not your guy. I'm just here to encourage and love you. And it was a very touching time, and I still feel bonded to this day, even though that happened in 1994. The pastor was Kelly Clem, who's a good friend. Kelly's husband was Dale. Again, we're friends to this day. But Kelly and Dale's 4-year-old daughter, Hannah, was crushed in that, one of the 20 deaths in the church. And they were performing a Palm Sunday drama. And the whole thing was just horrifying. So Jen, that was great, and thanks for the memories. But let's bring in Bruce Jones with Midland Radio. Bruce, I know you got some thoughts on the tragedy in Mississippi Friday night and what happened this weekend.
Yeah, and as we've spoken before on this show and at weather conferences, you never know what kind of circumstances an individual was in when the tornado hit their home. We just try to encourage everybody to have multiple and redundant ways of getting these messages. And if you live in the United States of America, kind of pay attention to the weather forecast every day as given on TV by your local meteorologists. We're in that season now, and we try to get people to be aware of what's coming. Just today we had a meeting.
I was going to say, Bruce, what you go ahead and then I'll make my comment.
Oh, I was just going to say we had a meeting today at my office, and I reminded people that we here in Kansas and Missouri could see severe weather on Thursday and Friday of this week, and everybody was kind of taken aback. That was the first they'd heard of it. So we all get busy, and it's important to make sure that we're always forcing ourselves to pay the best attention we can.
And, I would be very curious if we get some firm research on Rolling Fork and Silver City, the cities in the path of this, horrible EF4 tornado. What percentage of people had weather radios? And again, it's not a judgment if you don't have one. There's no judging here, but it's just good information. And I will say too, Bruce, you go to a place like Rolling Fork or Silver City, and quite frankly, there's some people that maybe can't afford a weather radio, and that's another consideration here. But the truth is, most people can. And I just very fascinated to see how the warning dissemination process worked and how they received the warning. Did they hear the warning? Did they hear the warning and not do anything? Maybe they didn't know what to do. I got a gut feeling, but gut feelings don't mean anything. Siren dependency was an issue in this thing, but we can't stress the urgency of everybody, I say everybody in your home and in your business having a NOAA weather radio, and it has nothing to do with cell service. It's good stuff. You need one.
Yeah, last week I spoke at the National Association of Insurance Commissioners at their annual meeting, and mentioned to them, I encouraged them all to become Weather Ready Nation ambassadors. I said the insurance industry would be perfect for this program because you can not only teach weather safety in your individual businesses, whether you're at the state insurance commissioner or you're running the national office for State Farm Insurance or AAA Insurance, those guys and gals were all there. But I said, every state in the union has a severe weather awareness week. And that gives you an opportunity to send out from your insurance company or your insurance commission a reminder to everybody in the state that it's Severe Weather Awareness Week and it's time to get your head on straight about the coming severe weather season. So I'm with you, James. I think that every home should have a NOAA weather radio. It's America's official federal warning system. It's a direct broadcast that is initiated by the radar operator pushing that tornado warning button on their console. And from there, within about 2 seconds, the weather radios go off automatically. So much like a smoke detector, these devices work silently. You plug them in, you program them, and you leave them alone. But on that one day or that one night when you need to be alerted, it'll be there for you. So we encourage everybody.
I got to share this, Bruce. I was at an elementary school today, and for those that don't know, I'm in a school every day, 1 to 2 schools, and I was at Priceville today, which is in Morgan County, Alabama. That was hit hard. They had 2 tornadoes Friday night, and one child brought a weather radio and wanted me to sign it. So I actually autographed this guy's Midland weather radio. I said, and he said, that thing went off and it's like a security blanket for us at our house because we know that thing's going to go off. Sometimes the phone works and sometimes it doesn't. But I thought that was too cool seeing a child asking me to sign a NOAA weather radio. That's a first.
Well, and thank you for lending your voice to the voice of the National Weather Service and for supporting it the way you do, James. It's very important. I was just today out in our warehouse. We had a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-person team programming a whole bunch of weather radios for the city of Gadsden and their county. Is it
Etowah?
Etowah, yeah, thank you.
Etowah County.
Yeah, we were just out in we're trying to get them done quickly because they got apparently a weather radio event coming up in their county this Saturday. We're sending out 1 pallet tomorrow. We've got 2 more going either tomorrow afternoon or the next day. We're trying to rush them down there. But yeah, in Alabama, I think people are getting the message, and primarily it's from you, James. So thank you for your support on behalf of the National Weather Service and the NOAA Weather Radio Network. If you're a fan of WeatherBrains, we do have an offer for you. We appreciate the fact that you're out promoting weather safety, that you're encouraging people to have a plan, have a kit, get prepared. But we do have an offer for you. If you'd like to buy a weather radio for a loved one, or if you don't have one yourself, you can go to midlandusa.com and get 25% off when you use a special promo code. It's the WeatherBrains promo code. It's SPAN 25. That's SPANN 25 is the promo code. And you would use that promo code at midlandusa.com. And there you can get 25% off of any weather radio. We have weather radios that you use when you travel. If you have an RV or a camper, it's important to have a portable weather radio with you. At home, you'd probably want one that you can program just to go off for your specific area. So 25% off when you use the SPAN, SPANN 25 promo code at midlandusa.com. And on behalf of the National Weather Service and NOAA, thank you very much for getting the word out that NOAA weather radios do save lives.
And we have a big weather radio programming event Thursday of this week in Centerville, Alabama, which is in Bibb County. And this is before everybody on this show was born. But 50 years ago, in May 27th, 1973, a horrible F4 tornado came through Bibb County. And it hit the town of Brent, which is adjacent to Centerville. And on a Sunday night, it killed people in the Brent Baptist Church. It took out the Weather Service WSR 57 radar site in Brent. And it was a long track, violent tornado. And, they're going to do a lot of things on the 50th anniversary of that. But anyway, we're going to be programming weather radios there Thursday. And we know the crowds are going to be huge. And people are starting to listen. And if you listen to WeatherBrains, you can be a disciple, if you will, for us. You can spread the word that your friends and your relatives, they need a weather radio. There's a good chance you might have one if you listen to WeatherBrains, but I guarantee you the person next door, probably they don't have one. So you need to go tell them that's what they need to do. And I tell this all the time to the realtors. That's a great gift. When you sell a house, Throw a weather radio in there. Take some of your commission money and get a weather radio. So anyway, Bruce, thanks. And hang tight for picks of the week. Let's do weather roundup really quickly. So we're coming off a fairly high impact, obviously, event for the past few days down here in the Deep South. The emphasis will be shifting to Oklahoma. So Rick Smith, what's the scoop later this week?
Well, looks like we've been in this Thursday cycle for this will be, I think, the third week. So this will be the third week in a row we've had a risk of severe weather on Thursday. It's looking a little bit more conditional. This was shaping up to where it looked like it could have been one of our first real dry line supercell days of the season. We've had a bunch of kind of not the traditional what people think of as Oklahoma severe weather days. But the timing is the model data is just looking like the timing's just not going to be there with things syncing up just right, which is perfectly fine with me. But so we may get some storms overnight Thursday night and into Friday. Friday, the emphasis shifts over to eastern Oklahoma, and then there's a big enhanced risk area, Arkansas, Missouri, and points east on Friday. But it's looking like we may skirt by on this one and not get too much out of it, thankfully, if things don't sync up just right.
But James Adelot, what does it mean for you in Tulsa town?
Yes, I concur with Rick. I think it's his issue Thursday, and I'm hoping this thing's so out of phase Friday for me that it really doesn't start to get going until it's east of my area. So hopefully the only thing around here will just be the disruption of my schedule Friday morning and nothing much worse than that. But long term, it does look unsettled next week, next couple of weeks. So starting to get that look.
You know what happens Saturday? I think it's April Fool's. April is here. So tis the season.
Yeah.
So Kim, what are your thoughts on the event that's coming up later this week?
I'll just say I'm grateful that it's no longer looking like this, slam dunk for this area. Like Rick was saying, true dry line based tornado event here. We'll keep an eye on it. But with my luck, what's going to happen is it's going to be one of these days where we get this line, the convergence in western Oklahoma that congeals into this line that comes here, and for some strange little blip of nature. I'm sure Jenna would have a more elegant thing that she could imagine going wrong that would end up producing a tornado somewhere within a mile of my house, if not on my house. So I will absolutely not doom us here by saying, oh, we're fine. It's gonna be great.
Nothing to it.
Ain't nothing to it. I will say internally we had our little WeatherBrains March Madness bracket challenge going on, and several of our listeners joined that. I mentioned internally on our email list, I had Purdue and Alabama making it to like the Final Four, and I said, by doing that, I have condemned them both to failure.
Right.
And
there's no hope.
So you can blame me. I absolutely am what went wrong there. So I am not going to comment about tornadoes or their likelihood or lack thereof. Just nope. I'm out.
Yeah. The late great Al Mohler, he always said, when it comes to thunderstorms, expect the unexpected. You got to be ready. So Jana, are you in Columbus?
I am. Yes. Yeah.
So are you done with snow yet? That's my big question.
Yeah, we actually have had a very snowless winter. So I live actually about an hour and 20 minutes southeast of Columbus. I'm still in Athens, where I started out my career. So I make the commute up to Columbus on days that I teach. And thankfully, this winter, I had snow twice to think about. And both times it was slushy accumulation on the road and nothing else. So we have had our magnolias blooming, our forsythias blooming, our daffodils. So everything here thinks that it is mid-April.
Yeah, wow. And Jen, it's I guess same thing for you. And by the way, I was just thinking, April 1st, what that means? April 3rd is just around the corner. You've been working on that 1974 project.
Yes, we went down and did our trip and have information on 7 tornadoes for the 1974 project. So we're going to have to extend this out for a while. We've got so much information, but yeah, it's a big anniversary, and Our goal is to try to write 40 summaries on that event of the 148. It's going to take us a couple of years, I think, to do what we want to do to cover it. But I mean, it doesn't matter if it was 5 days ago or 50 years ago. The PTSD and the emotions surrounding it are real. And, you know, folks we talked to were still in tears, even, you know, 49 years later. So we're just privileged to be able to share these stories with everybody.
Well, I can't wait, because the one I talked about, the Brent tornado in 1973 and the super outbreak in 74, I was in high school, and that changed my life. That's one of the reasons I'm doing this. And we've got to preserve these events, because quite frankly, a lot of the people that survived them, they've gone on. They're not here anymore. And, you know, we need to preserve that. So it's a great project. Troy Kimmel, you were not alive 50 years ago, but what's happening down in Austin, Texas?
Yeah, hopefully lightning will strike when you say that. But no, it's just pretty quiet here. You know, we're still lacking on our rainfall for what Kim and Rick and James up in Tulsa say. You know, everything's been to our northeast, and that looks like it'll continue to be that way for the latter part of this week. I don't think we see more than 20, at most 30% rainfall probabilities through the 7-day period. But we'll wait and see. A couple of cold fronts we're dealing with, but just not much dynamics with it this far to the south.
All right, so let's do picks of the week before we wrap it up this week. And Jenna, we'll come to you at the end. Give you time to think about a good pick that you will have for us, Jana. So let's start with, and again, this is something weather related. This could be website, hardware, software, whatever. So let's start with Dr. James A., because he's got to do some television action news at the top of the hour. So what you got?
Well, my pick of the week was the YouTube videos that Chris Broyles at SBC put out in conjunction with a paper that he published. There's a short version of that doesn't go into the depth that the longer, more meteorological version does. I'll link to that, both those versions, and his paper. And he gets into a really tight hyper analysis of the May 20th, 2013 Moore tornado, and pays very close attention to some of the stuff that Dr. Hauser was talking about, the spin up from the ground, descending reflectivity cores, rear flank downdraft, pinching the inflow. It's a fascinating series of videos, but highly recommend that if you have interest in tornadoes.
Excellent. Again, all these links will be on the website, weatherbrains.com. Let's go to Troy. What do you have for us this week, Troy?
My article that I found earlier today and sent to all the Weather Brains is the Daily Mail article from Rolling Fork. And this one, I've never been there, but I had a chance to kind of watch social media, and a lot of people had Chuck's Dairy Bar located in Rolling Fork. What's amazing about the place is it's one of the last places as the tornado crossed Highway 61. The owner and her husband and 6 other people very quickly heard the tornado was coming, got into the cooler of that restaurant. And if you look, it's not wiped off the surface, but the only thing that's really still left standing that much were the coolers. So we had 8 people that were able to think as the storm really came down on them, moved in from the southwest, and the owner, his wife, and 6 employees all sheltered, and they're all alive today. So there is good news there. I hope that business had been there for 60 years, James, and this family had owned it for about 20 of those. And I'm hoping that Chuck's Dairy Bar will come back, and maybe with just as nice a cooler, and maybe with a storm shelter, and maybe with weather radios, you know, as this community comes back. But I thought the Daily Mail article about the Chuck's Dairy Bar along Highway 61 in Rolling Fork was a good article. I encourage people to read it.
Yeah. The people stories. That's what I like to read now. You know, at some point we'll look at the physical science side of that, but right now it's the people stories that make a difference. Let's see, Jana, your internet is acting up. Let's try it before it dies here. You give your pick. She's already got her pick in. She's good. You know she's good when she's got her pick in early. Go.
Yeah, so my pick of the week is a recently published article in Nature Communications by Karen Kasiba and Josh Werman. This is a sciencey article. It's called "The Strongest Winds and Tornadoes Are Very Near the Ground." And basically what they did is they took mobile radar observations from 73 tornadoes where they had observations at heights below 100 meters above the ground, and did a vertical wind comparison in the intensity of the rotation from basically as low to the ground as they could get, which is approximately, maybe 10 to 20 meters above the ground. And they found that in nearly all of their cases, the winds were strongest just above the ground. So the lower the winds were in a vertical sense, the stronger they actually were. So this is actually kind of different than what you would expect in like thunderstorm winds associated with a non-tornado scenario where the winds actually increase as you go above the ground. So this is really kind of hitting home how weird and unusual tornadoes are.
Yeah, this is great stuff. I mean, this is good practical knowledge for those of us that do what we do. This is great. So thanks, Jana. All right, let's go to Bruce Jones. Bruce, give us something good this week.
Hey, well, John Muir, the famous naturalist, once wrote out a Sierra Nevada windstorm at the top of a 100-foot tall Douglas spruce tree, which he claimed was swaying back and forth 20 to 30 degrees. But the Wisconsin Historical Society has a description of the thermometer that young John Muir made when he was a boy and lived out on a farm, a thermometer that was mounted on the side of a barn. This thermometer was so sensitive that when anyone approached it within 4 or 5 feet, the heat radiated from the observer's body caused the hand of the dial to move so fast that the motion was plainly visible. And when he stepped back, the hand moved slowly back to its normal position. But there's a picture on the Wisconsin Historical Society site of this thermometer that this little boy named John Muir, I guess he was a teenager at the time, invented and put out on his farm so that while they were working in the field hands could look over there on the side of the barn and tell what the temperature was.
That's a great story. That is awesome. Just excellent. That's too cool. All right, Jen, give us something good. Go.
All right, so my pick of the week is from Aaron Rigsby, who was out Friday night, and he is one of the chasers I highly respect. I think he does a great job at he does get close, but he does stop, and I know he helped a lot of folks that night. But then he got first of light drone footage that he put out on YouTube. I think the use of drones is so important in so many different ways. We don't want to look at the damage, but I think we need to. And there's, from a people perspective, to be able to see what these folks are going through, it's important for us to see it. I hope that people see it and then go have a more respect for what the weather can do. That way you're not as, disassociated from it. And obviously it can help the National Weather Service with surveys and all that. So my pick of the week is his drone footage for the rolling fork, and you can just really see the path of damage, and it's just so heartbreaking.
Outstanding. Great. And again, my pick is YouTube video of our live coverage. I like to go back and watch this stuff to see what we did right, what we did wrong. But I was pretty puckered, that thing coming out of Amory. And I think people can read me. I wasn't doing the gag lines or anything. I mean, it was all business because it was just a horrific signature coming out of Monroe County, Mississippi. And again, that'll be my pick of the week, the YouTube version of our live coverage that Friday night. All right, Rick Smith, go. What you got for us?
Well, if you were watching any of the SPC products during the event Friday night, you saw a couple of these, I don't know, we call them micro MDs or mesobeta scale MDs, where they're talking about the tornado intensity. We could do a whole episode on that. But this is based on a paper from Brian Smith, and you actually use several weather parameters. And there's a tool that we have in our office now where we can pick the rotational velocity, the TDS, all types of information there, the sector parameter, and it will give us an estimate. It's not going to replace a survey, but it'll give us an estimate of the potential tornado intensity. And it seems to have done a fairly good job with this event, and does a good job with others. It's not going to tell us this is an EF4, but it can give us general ranges of wind speed, so you can read the whole background. It's a sciencey paper, but it gives you some good insight into comparing surveyed tornado tracks to the radar data with that, and then trying to tie it all together. And really one of the main uses would be to help us pick the tornado tags and the warnings, considerable, catastrophic. So that's my pick.
Awesome. Great deal. All right, Kim, go give us something good.
Yeah, mine's going to be a little less sciencey, a little bit more on the people. I had the opportunity today to speak with the NPR program 1A for a couple of minutes, and I love when I do these media things where it's live and I'm coming on after other guests, and they were talking about the Mississippi event. I was going to talk about tornado survivability, epidemiology stuff, but the person who was on before me is the senior VP of disaster services for the American Red Cross, and they were talking about just what it's like on the ground in that area, and shared some stunning things for us to think about with respect to just how often we have disasters that require Red Cross response in this country. He said something on the order of a new response deployment every 6 to 8 days. And it's just incredible to think about what people are going through in this Mississippi event, but also to respect at the same time just how much is always going on in our country. And I think, to me, as I was listening to him and reflecting, it speaks to me on this level of, we all are scientists, or we're all interested in this science, and we're all also citizens, and we can do a lot for our communities to help them when these things happen, and they happen all too often, if not to our particular town, certainly within our region, and we really make the difference when we volunteer. So listen to that, feel emboldened. My comments just reinforce his, and the importance of that for people go through these traumatic events. Now is the moment where these people are going to decide how they absorb it into their psyche for the rest of their lives. Will it be just a tragedy, or will it be a thing where they remember kindness coming into their lives? And that's the difference that we get to make after the event.
Yeah, and I've shared this before. The people that came to our home after we were hit 2 years ago, I will never forget their kindness and their compassion. They don't want money. They honestly did it out of love, out of wanting to help. Nobody forced them to do it. They had heavy equipment. It was the most incredible thing. To this day, I'll start crying just thinking about it. And I wish one day that I could be that good and be like them. But you're right. This is when, hopefully, where we are in this country, we're so divided, and goodness, there's just so many things going on. For once, we can just come together and help people, which is what it's all about. All right. So, Jana, real quick before we wrap it up tonight, if people would like to follow you, are you on the socials any way, shape, or form, or how can people get in touch with you?
I do not do Twitter.
Good. That's a smart thing. Smart.
Yes.
I
do not need any more distractions in my life. So really the best way to reach out to me would be my professional email address. I am on LinkedIn, but my email address, I can share it. I'll type it in the chat. It's just my last name, Hauser, Houser, and a period and numbers 262 @osu.edu.
Well, on behalf of us practitioners, thank you for your work. Goodness gracious. Again, I've learned so much on the show tonight. It was just a great show. And we do have to wrap this one up. But if you are new here, we are on the air every Monday night. We typically start the show at about 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. A lot of folks do watch. You can watch it live. Some are watching live right now on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/weatherbrains. But we know that most of you listen via your favorite podcast app. If you want to get in touch with us, the email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. We'll do an email segment next week. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, and God bless. Thanks, everybody. This was a good one.
Yeah, thanks, Jana.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
It was outstanding. Thank you. Great show.